Today we're going to talk about solving equations that have the distributive property. And these equations really aren't any more complicated than solving two-step equations. We've just got an extra little step, and that's that we need to distribute this whatever is in front of the parentheses to any terms that are inside the parentheses. And that's kind of the number one mistake, is we'll distribute to maybe the first term and then we'll forget to distribute it to the rest of the terms that are in the parentheses. So let's go ahead and look at solving this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build my wall, or put a line down from the equal sign. That's just to remind me whatever I do on one side, I need to do to the other. And I'm going to go ahead and distribute this. So I've got to multiply all the terms that are inside the parentheses by this 5. So I have 5 times 5, which is 25. And then I have 5 times a negative 3k. I'm just going to take whatever sign is in front of my next term. Remember, subtracting a positive is the same thing as adding a negative number. So 5 times a negative 3k is negative 15k. Still equal to 115. So now I'm left with a two-step equation. I'm going to go ahead and put a box around my variable and the constant that is in front of it. Notice I put the box around that negative as well. It is a subtraction sign, but remember what I said before. Adding a negative number is the same thing as subtracting a positive number. So I'm just going to go ahead and box that subtraction sign. And I need to get rid of whatever's not in the box. And we've got a positive 25, so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to subtract a 25 from both sides. Make that 25 better. And that leaves me with negative 15k and 90 on this side. Remember, those 25s will cancel out. And so now I've got to get rid of the coefficient. I've got a negative 15, so I'm going to divide by a negative 15. I'm going to be left with k is equal to negative 6. We could, though, have also solved this equation without distributing. And so I wanted to take a second to point this out. So when I'm looking at what I have in front of the parentheses here, I have a 5. Well, what I also notice is that 115 is also divisible by 5. And so when you have anything right next to a parentheses, what we're doing here, it means that we are multiplying. And so I could do the inverse of multiplication. Remember, we solve equations by making sure that we use inverse operations and we apply them to both sides of the equation. So what I could have done is I could have said, okay, well, I'm going to divide both sides by 5. Which would leave me with just what's in the parentheses. I've got a 5 minus 3k. And then I have 23 on this side. 115 divided by 5 is is 23. And then once again, I'm left with a two-step equation. I'm going to put a box around my variable and its coefficient. I'm going to subtract what's not in the box. Well, I'm going to do the inverse operations, which in this case is subtracting. It's going to leave me with a negative 3k and 18. I'm then going to get rid of the coefficient. I'm going to divide by my coefficient because in this case my variable is being multiplied. And I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. And I'm left with k is equal to negative 6. So I got the same answer that I did when I went ahead and distributed the number that was in front of the parentheses. If this seems a little confusing to you, don't worry about it. I just wanted to point it out that this is another way that we could have solved it. If you can divide through by whatever number is in front of the parentheses, feel free to do so. Okay, let's look at another one. So we've got 78 is equal to 6 times the quantity negative 3p minus 5. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a line down from the equal side. And I am going to distribute my 6. So I've got 6 times a negative 3p. And I've got 6 times a negative 5. So 6 times a negative 3p is negative 18p. 6 times a negative 5 is negative 30. It is still equal to 78. Notice I took the signs in front, negative 3p, negative 5. Now I'm going to put a box around my variable because I'm down to a two-step equation. I've got negative 18p. So I still have this minus 30. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to add 30. Whatever I do to this side, I have to do to this side. So I'm left with a negative 18p. And on this side, I have 108. I am now going to divide by my coefficient because I have negative 18p, which means that negative 18 is multiplying the p. So divide both sides by negative 18. And I'm left with, those 18s will cancel out, I'm left with a p, and I'm left with a negative 6. Which is, interestingly enough, just the same as the solution to our other problem. Now, I could have also divided by the 6 instead of multiplying the negative 3p minus 5 all the way through, because the 78 is divisible by 6, and so I'll show you that real quick. So once again, I'll put a line down. Now, instead of distributing this 6, instead of saying, well, I have 6 of this negative 3p minus 5, I'm just going to go ahead and divide both sides by 6. Those will cancel. I'm left with negative 3p minus 5. And on this side, I have got 13. Once again, I'm down to a two-step equation, so I'm going to do the opposite. What I need to do, I'm going to use my inverse operations. I'm going to add 5 to both sides. I'm left with a negative 3p is equal to 18. I am then going to isolate my variable by getting rid of that coefficient. Since I have a negative 3p, I'm multiplying p by negative 3. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide by a negative 3p, or by the negative 3, leaving the p. Those will cancel, and I'm left with p and a negative 6. So notice I got the same answer. One of the final things I wanted to point out when you are using the distributive property is that sometimes we'll see something like this. So 2x minus 4 is equal to 10. And we've got this negative hanging out here in front of the parentheses. What this is saying is you are subtracting this entire quantity, 2x minus 4. And so you have to distribute that. You have to subtract each of these quantities, or each of these terms that are inside the parentheses. And so we are going to distribute that negative to every term that is inside. So it's we're going to multiply through by a negative 1. So negative 1 times 2x is negative 2x. Negative 1 times a negative 4 is plus 4. And then once again, we're back to a two-step equation. We would subtract 4 from both sides, giving us 6 and a negative 2x. We would then divide by our coefficient, in this case, negative 2, giving us x. Divide by negative 2, which would give us a negative 3. X would be equal to negative 3. But I wanted to make sure that you keep that in mind, that when you have a negative that is hanging out in front of parentheses, you're going to distribute that negative all the way through your parentheses.